Okay, I want to start out with a clip from the classic Disney take on Hamlet, The Lion King.
What was that? The weather. Very peculiar, don't you think?
Yeah. Looks like the winds are changing.
Change is good.
Yeah, but it's not easy. I know what I have to do, but going back means I'll have to face my past. I've been running from it for so long. Ow! Jeez, what was that for?
It doesn't matter. It's in the past.
Yeah, but it still hurts.
Oh, yes, the past can hurt. But the way I see it, you can either run from it or learn from it. Ah, you see? So what are you going to do?
First, I'm gonna take your stick.
No, not a stick. Hey, where are you going?
I'm going back!
Good! Go on! Get out of here!
We can either run from the past or we can learn from it. Now, 27 years ago, when Reverend Mark Morrison Reed wrote the preface to the third edition of Black Pioneers in a White Denomination, he told us that in a time of moving forward, he was choosing to look back. I think he's very smart. He's saying, we can either run from the past or we can learn for it. We can learn from it. And I think that if we want to know where we're going, we have to know where we've been. We have to examine our past. Rafiki reminds us that we have these choices. And Simba learned from that. We can run from it or we can learn from it. Sometimes this can be threatening to people. Now look at the furor that the 1619 Project has created. And if you don't know what the 1619 Project is, this is a project, a huge project created by journalists at the New York Times to critically examine American history from the perspective of our being founded as a nation upon the backs of slavery and as a conquest, a nation of conquest of what we've done to the indigenous people and a nation built on the backs of slaves. Now, some white supremacist state legislatures have written laws to ban the teaching of critical race theory or racism in public institutions, to ban the use of the 1619 Project and this teaching in schools, because they're so afraid of this. Recently, the University of North Carolina refused to offer tenure to an accomplished, a seriously accomplished journalism professor, Nicole Hannah-Jones, because white supremacists complained about her work on the 1619 Project. Now, she is the first person in her position. She holds a chair in journalism at the university, and she is the first person in her position not to be offered tenure. Understanding history gives us power. It helps us to make sense of the present. We learn from it and we adapt from it, and it helps us to shape the future. The saying goes, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. Now, whitewashing history is one way to ignore history, right? Just looking at history through rose-colored glasses, pretending that history was something that it wasn't. And this is not new. There's nothing new in this. Ecclesiastes tells us there's nothing new under the sun. In the Bible, there are two separate accounts of King David, for example. So King David is important because he's the first historical king in scripture. It's possible that Saul was a real person, but David was for sure. So the texts that deal with David are histories. And I'm going to go off on a short tangent, I promise you. But there's other stuff in those stories as well. And the Bible is made up of a lot of different stuff, right? There's fiction, there are novels in the Bible, there's prayers, there are hymns, there's law, there are proverbs and all kinds of other stuff, and there's history. Anyway, there is the David that we meet in 1st and 2nd Samuel, and there is the David that we meet in Chronicles. Chronicles is the book that's written by the spin doctors. It's all the good, shiny stuff written by like the Politburo, right? It's none of the bad stuff. Chronicle leaves out the inconvenient bits that make folks uncomfortable and show David to be fallible. And sometimes even questionable in things that he's done. Now, I saw something recently that said that if the only history you're studying is history that makes you feel good about the past, you aren't studying history. And so here we are today in a world where some folks are so afraid of facing the truth of the past that they feel the need to punish those who have brought it out into the light. We want those rose-colored glasses. We want that version of history, that Chronicles version, in which our ancestors only did good things. But how is that helping us to move forward? How is that helping us to change for the better? As we ignore our history, we watch as our nation repeats and amplifies the errors of our past. Smithsonian Magazine published an article in 2017 about the Know Nothing Party and how its legacy is still with us today. Now, this was published in 2017, that was 4 years ago. And I read it recently, and what struck me was how prescient that article was, how much of that is even more true right now. One of the sad things about this story is that we are watching many of the same issues from the 1850s play out again right now as we watch populism, anti-immigration sentiment, and big lies take the place of any real understanding. We know that learning from the past is critical if we are going to build the nation that we seek. We know that learning from the past is critical if we are going to build the nation that we seek, indeed the world that we seek. But what about closer to home? Now, we've been doing this work within the UUA for several years now. Mark Morrison Reed wrote the 3rd edition, put out the 3rd edition of Black Pioneers in a White Denomination in 1994. And we are still working on some of those issues because we have so much work to do. It's important work, and the UUA has made it a priority to dismantle the systems of white supremacy. And if we're serious about that, it means that we have to know where those systems are rooted, how they came about, and how to recognize the patterns when they emerge. So that doesn't just mean looking at, well, what happened in 1969 to 1971, or 1968 to 1970, with the whole blow up at General Assembly and what went on there. And it doesn't mean just going back to 1961 at the merger. And it really doesn't mean just going back to the first Unitarians or Universalists in the United States. It means going back really to our roots and understanding our entire history, understanding American history, and where where these congregations, where these first churches came from. So Justo Gonzalez talks about, he's an authority on early church history, and he talks about studying the early church to know where we are today. We're standing on the shoulders of all of these people. Unitarian Universalism didn't pop up out of nothing in 1961, and Unitarians in America didn't pop up out of nothing in the 17th and 18th centuries, nor did Universalists. So we need to understand all of that carefully, certainly paying attention to bigger issues and things in our recent history, right? But we can't just pretend that we've just been here since 1961, because there's a lot more than that. And it doesn't mean, examining this critically doesn't mean that we're bad people. In fact, we're stronger people. It makes us stronger to go back and examine this. But some people have felt threatened by this. Mainly folks who've been in privileged positions for a long time. Much like the folks who've been trying to shut down the 1619 project, they've been trying to shut down and deflect the work of the UUA and our constituent congregations. But we're stronger than that. We can do this. We can examine ourselves critically. We can own that we've done some pretty bad things in the past, and also some pretty good things. We can tell the whole story. Now, this work is important for congregations as well. That's why one of the primary tasks of interim ministry is to help a congregation examine and face its own history, to come to terms with the past. Now, you folks at UUCLB, you didn't ask me to do a traditional interim ministry with you, but you did ask for a minister with interim ministry skills, and you did want to combine some of that traditional transitional work with some other aspects of ministry. So we've been doing that together. And I've noticed sometimes that when I start to bring up questions about our UUCLB history here, sometimes there's a reluctance to engage in the question. A little bit like the two versions of King David, or sometimes maybe like that Christmas letter that sometimes we would like to put out to folks. We might be afraid to look too deeply at our own past. So, sometimes we don't want to share all the stuff that's going on behind the scenes. We might be afraid of what we might find. And perhaps, and I don't know, but perhaps this is true for our visitors from Tennessee as well. Maybe you do take romps through your church archive, or maybe that's also a hard thing for you to do as well. Much like going through our own personal family histories, when we go through those old photographs and we find pictures of that embarrassing great uncle, or pictures of really hard times, not everything was rosy in every family. And if we look at, for example, what's happening with the British royal family right now, that's being aired out in real time, in big time. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, have chosen to speak out about some of their own history, some of their recent history, and it's made some other people very uncomfortable. Well, they're doing it in a very big and public way, and most of us don't do that on Oprah. But it's an illustration of what I've been talking about. Prince Harry talks about being met with silence and not being able to talk about these things. So perhaps you know what I'm talking about. And yet it's important that we do this. It's important that we examine our histories. If we want to build the future we seek, we need to know where we're coming from. The American poet Archibald MacLeish said, "Religion is at its best when it makes us ask hard questions of ourselves. It is at its worst when it deludes us into thinking we have all the answers for everybody else." Well, examining our own history can be hard. But the thing is, it's not only hard. The thing is, we can also discover some wonderful hidden gems that we didn't know were there because we've been afraid to examine that box. Just as so many people are afraid to open that box of the 1619 Project. What gems are we missing out on because we're afraid to reframe the story and look at it from another perspective? And just like the 1619 Project, we can take a critical look at ourselves. We are strong enough to do that, and to do it without a spin doctor. We have been doing that faithfully in the UUA for a while now, and we can do it here in our own congregation. We can study our own history, tell all of our stories, even the hard ones, and we can learn from them. When we know the stories, we can see the patterns. When we recognize the patterns, we can change the ones we want to change. Like Simba, we can react in a new way when we know what's coming. Instead of running from the past, we can learn from it. We can build the beloved community we seek. We can awaken our spirit. We can connect in kindness. My friends, we can help to heal the world. Are you with me? Can we do this work together? Are you with me? Namaste.